right. Welcome to the Strength Athlete Podcast, episode 4. This is episode 4, right?
Yeah.
We are today discussing mistakes that we've made and how you can avoid them, things that we have just kind of overcome with time. We've got all the coaches here on with us, Bryce, as well as Joe, Chris, and Eric. If you guys want to say what's up.
Hey.
Hello.
Hey, y'all.
One small announcement before we get started. We have accepted a sponsor for the TSA podcast that we're pretty excited about, LBD Fitness, who you may or may not be familiar with. If you're not, I would highly recommend checking them out. They are a strength lifestyle brand that focuses on giving back to the world. And for every item they sell, they actually donate what equates to, I believe 30 days of clean water, 1 month of clean water for a person in need. Thus far, I think they've given away somewhere between 100 and 200,000 days worth of water for people who need it. So they have a pretty awesome mission behind them. I would highly suggest checking them out. And just a big thanks to those guys for stepping along and partnering up with us. And so we're looking forward to what's to come there. As for subjects at hand here, I think we'll let Bryce lead off and get rolling.
Yeah, so the main purpose of this podcast that we want to do today is talk about how we've failed. Talk about some of the mistakes that we've made so that you don't have to make them. We're going to tailor this toward newer powerlifters and try to give some good information so that you don't have to go through the same trials and tribulations that we went through, give you a leg up, and allow you a jump start on your journey in powerlifting success. So we'll talk about some of the mistakes that we've learned the hard way, and then we'll talk about some general tips for newer powerlifters, and we'll kind of break that up into some domains. So big mission, but we're going to try to get to as much as we can. And I think it'll be fun. So I think we'll start off by talking about some of the mistakes
My bad, guys.
That's cool. Hani just discovered the air horn, and apparently he's a little trigger happy right now. So
I didn't realize the button isn't a button. You can press anywhere on the screen and it goes off.
Good stuff. So it's impossible to say anything serious after that. No, so here we go. We'll talk about some of the mistakes that we've made. And I think the best way to do this is kind of do one and throw it around to another coach, or if we want to pick up and say me too and stuff like that, to highlight some of the important stuff. We'll do that. So I'll go first. And I just kind of wrote down some of the things that over my 8 years of powerlifting that I've made some mistakes, and we make less as we go along, but some of the early ones stick out to us and are hilarious now, but in a moment probably weren't as funny. So one of the big first ones that I had written down was thinking that I was invincible, and it's very easy to just forget about the important pieces of recovery and kind of the balance of the overall amount of stress and fatigue that you're causing to your system. And a particular day stands out in memory to me where I had a morning workout, a volleyball coaching practice where I ended up playing, and then I went to an open gym at night and played volleyball as well. I woke up the next morning, I literally could not stand up straight. Like I was semi-injured, probably a low-grade strain in my low back or something like that. But that was a big wake-up call to me that, maybe these things would have been great in isolation, but combining all of those on the same day, like I literally could not stand up straight. I had to kind of lean on things for support. And that kind of woke me up to the idea that, I'm not invincible. Like I really have to take care of myself and kind of balance the overall amount of work that I'm doing.
To add on to what you're saying there, Bryce, I think we all kind of went through a period like that where basically this is kind of part of youth and training, really, so to speak. Youth being in terms of training years, it's just in your early phases, you can just beat yourself up so badly and get away with it. I mean, when I first started, my original goal was to get into bodybuilding. And so my focus was always on kind of incorporating some type of cardio. And there was a period where I was supersetting every single set of every single movement with 200 skips with a jump rope. And that's actually one that was kind of funny. I remember being in incredible cardio condition, but I told Alberto, who was my coach at the time, that I was doing that. And he's like, dude, why? You need to stop immediately. You're completely working against what you want to achieve. And really, the pinnacle of my idiocy was when I was running the Shenko routine, one of the higher end ones, so like the CMS prep or something like that, because I'd run several of the routines back to back. And I had simultaneously started using the Insanity workout videos. And so it was like, if you're familiar with P90X, basically similar thing to that, but it's 100% plyometrics. And at the time, I thought it was awesome. I was like, dude, I'm in such crazy good shape. I could go run a freaking marathon right now. But looking back on it, when I finished that, like 2 or 3 weeks later, it was basically my training just slowly went like this, completely downhill for a while, as did the way my body felt. And overall, I think I'm still kind of paying a toll for having been such a misinformed and really irresponsible young lifter. But it served a lesson down the line to help improve me as both an athlete and as a coach. So I can kind of help to tell people, be like, playing basketball 6 days a week probably isn't a good idea if you want to peak for your powerlifting meet, things like that.
Side note, did those Insanity workouts die down, or did we just kind of select for an audience that doesn't pay attention to them? Like, is that still a thing? P90X, Insanity?
I think they have updated versions now. I think our audience just changed. So like the people that we are friends with on social media and the people that we see on a regular basis, the people we go out drinking with, like everybody's a power lifter in our entire life now. Like our girlfriends, for the most part, we are completely surrounded. And so we forget that there are normal people who still go to the gym to just, run on the treadmill for 30 minutes.
Yeah. Speaking of running, I actually had a very similar situation when I first started, like really getting serious with training. Back when I was a cross-country runner. So I can recall a time where I would run a 5K on a Tuesday, and then for some reason I got it in my head like, oh, I'm not working hard enough. I need to train still. So I would get done with the 5K. I would go home, and I don't even think I would eat anything. I would change, and then I would go to the gym and try to squat. And I just remember finishing up. I don't even remember what I was squatting, but I just remember thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm driving myself into the ground. What am I doing? And unlike you, Hani, I didn't have, Alberto or a coach guiding me at this time. So I just kept kind of doing that over and over again, and didn't exactly go too well.
Joe, to that point, I think when you're a new athlete, like you don't really know how much is the right amount of work to be doing. And you really do have that idea that more is better. And Chris, I think Chris can chime in with his own more is better story about old Mr. Smolov.
So I ran Smolov Junior for my bench and saw tremendous results with it. So not knowing anything about training at this time, I thought it would have been a great idea to apply it to all three of the big three at the same time. So I basically was squatting and benching 3 or 4 days a week, and then deadlifting on the opposite days. So no days off for a month, and basically I took the next 3 months completely off from lifting after that. So yeah, that was
awesome.
fun.
So I think we've all been in similar situations where we went through a period of time where we didn't have very much direction with our own training. I know for me, I've been training for over 10 years now for something, and probably for the first, at least half of that, maybe 5 or 6 years, I really had no direction in that. I just wanted to be good at everything that I was doing. So I had interest in bodybuilding, powerlifting, weightlifting, and even some endurance aspects. I wanted to be good at running, being able to run a mile in a certain time, things like that. So a lot of the training you could say that, but I would call it more like concurrent training, but with really no direction. So my workouts weren't really what you would see in a CrossFit gym, but it would be more like I would kind of structure my week out. So I would do some weightlifting, some strength training, and have some endurance training on the weekends or something like that. But trying to be really good at all those at the same time is, in most cases, not very optimal. So that was probably my biggest mistake in my early years of training, was really just wanting to be good at everything and not really specializing in anything.
Eric, did you end up being better at one of those out of all of them, or were you just pretty average at all of them?
I guess pretty average at them. When I was prepping for bodybuilding, I actually got pretty good at endurance training. So I got my mile to about 5 minutes, which wasn't really the goal at the time, but it just happened to be getting fairly lean and doing a lot of cardio, just kind of led it to that.
Okay. Do you think that kind of somewhat related to the fact that your body dropped 20% of its weight and and you essentially were using cardio to do? Okay, that's a fair reason. I know that Alberto uses that as a milestone, or used to, and his preps he would like run once a month or something, or however often, run a mile and would kind of track that time, and it was always just an interesting metric for him.
Yeah, and I think that's when he was kind of experimenting with that himself, so he had me doing that as well, and I actually enjoyed it. It was just another metric to keep track of, and it was I could see that my endurance was improving over time, so it was kind of cool in that aspect.
It just reminds me of that proverb that I heard a while ago. The person who chases after two rabbits catches neither, but just the idea that it's very tough to be good at many things. So who wants to go next for a lesson that you learned?
I think Joe had a pretty good one about trying to get too fat for too long.
Oh boy. Yeah. So I think it's all fair to say that anyone who's chased a physique goal at some point or another has gotten the idea of going on what I think the bodybuilding.com forums would call the dreamer's bulk.
Dirty bulk.
Yeah, where they would just eat everything in sight. And I remember, I think as a freshman in college, I started off around like 180-ish pounds in August. And by February, I was 231 pounds.
Strong. So 6 months, you put on how much?
Oh, God, Bryce, don't make me math. Like 50 pounds, maybe a little bit more. Yeah, it was.
You must have
crazy.
gained so much muscle.
I mean, I got stronger. Stronger.
Let me get the app out for that.
Oh, man. I deserve that one. I wish you could like inlay the picture just to see, because I have a comparison shot. But I remember specifically it being February, and I lived on the 12th floor of my dorm, and I remember we had a fire drill, and we couldn't use the elevators after to get back up. And I remember walking up and thinking, like, this is where I die. This is it here. I'm going to have a heart attack.
So, Joe, what happened? Did you have, like, a realization? Like, did you just realize, I did things the wrong way? Or,
Well, I think, I don't know. I just kind of, I remember at the time, I was just kind of very into reading people's experiences, and that was kind of what I had seen a lot of people do. A lot of, and I don't know, maybe I had just gotten unlucky and seen a lot of people that had gotten more unrealistic results that way. But then I remember, I actually think that was probably one of the times where I really started reading into like more evidence-based stuff, and I kind of realized, maybe this wasn't the best way to do it. And also, I think at that point, got into the, I was actually keeping kind of a rough track of what I was eating. Certainly not like counting my macros religiously, but I just remember like saying to myself, I cannot physically eat more. Like this is just too much. And I think some people are just like, that would be great. No, it's not. It's not at all.
I think the grass is always greener there, Joe. It's like all the skinny guys want to be big, all the big guys want to be lean, and it's you get the occasional total mesomorph, I believe they call them. Do people still use those terms? I don't know, but where they're kind of in the middle and they eat whatever they want, maintain like 11% body fat, at least when they're like between ages 13 and 25 before they start to get fat like everyone else, and it's just we all want to be that person. I was on kind of a dreamer bulk for like 16 years. Just
I dabbled for 16 years.
Well, I think a little known fact about me, I peaked out at around 296 pounds at my heaviest, a little while before starting to work with Alberto. And and that was by no means a product of me trying to gain weight. It was just the fact that, and to this day, I love food. And I think that most of us can empathize with that. By and large, we're a bunch of fat bastards at TSA, and I'm referring to the coaches, not to the athletes. But I try to encourage that in the athletes, but I certainly experienced a similar thing where it was, but that kind of created my later issue, which was the opposite of yours, Joe. And it was like all I did was obsess over dieting for several years. And again, Alberto could attest to that. I mean, it was all I cared about it, and it was like to the point where I wanted to do a bodybuilding show just because I wanted to get that lean and have photographs of myself with abs. And I remember like thinking about it. I was like, man, I wish I had some photos like that in that awesome, delicious golden brown tan of myself. And
Isn't that
I mean,
why everybody competes in bodybuilding anyways, just for the profile picture?
Shots fired. Shots fired.
Secret NPC pro Eric Bodhorn on your profile. But no offense to any pro bodybuilders watching this, it's definitely one of the hardest things I've ever done, and I didn't even finish. But you definitely have to have or for me anyway, I would have to have a certain degree of self-hate to actually make my way through an entire bodybuilding diet.
Yeah, and the funny part is that immediately after doing that huge streamer bulk, I went into my first contest prep and got myself all the way down to, I think my lowest weigh-in was 162 pounds, and that was in November of that year. So really big changes between those 2 years. Definitely another mistake I wouldn't recommend.
I think what we're talking about ultimately is some of the excesses of either excess calorie consumption or excess calorie deficits can really not only cause some physical problems but some psychological problems down the road. And if you can avoid that in any way possible, like that's something we all wish for you, is to avoid those, because they end up leaving you with body image issues that are not easy to fix.
Definitely.
Totally. What I like to say to clients and friends and just anybody who the subject ever comes up with is that you should have moderation in all things, including moderation itself. And basically, that means that if you want to go out and have dinner with your friends and you're dieting for a powerlifting competition, go out and have dinner with your friends. You can still make weight for the competition. The extra 500 or 1,000 calories that you have tonight, you divide that over the next 30 days. It's like, 30 calories a day? You can handle that. It's not a huge deal so long as you're accurate the rest of the time.
Actually, that's an interesting segue into one of the other mistakes that I wanted to touch on. The idea of being terrified of missing a training session. Early on, like, you kind of view the training program as like this sacrosanct, unchangeable thing that you need to complete in its entirety in order to get a desired outcome. And like missing a training session, I viewed it as something like I would never want to do, like miss a training session. And it unfortunately made me miss out on some really good experiences with friends or with family, or just being very inflexible with my day. And I'm sure that people formed a negative opinion of me because, like, hey, sorry, I can't hang out with you for like the next 3 weeks because I'm preparing for a training test, not even a competition, just like maxes in the gym, So being flexible with a training approach is not only going to be better for your goals, but better for lifestyle too. And that's something that took me too long to learn. Have you guys had experiences where you just needed to address that, and you had life experiences you had to miss out on?
I think my recovery kind of paid the toll on that when I was first using kind of auto-regulated style training before I knew a huge amount about how that's kind of that style of training work. This was probably, wow, that's kind of weird. My screen went black. This was several years ago, but I remember I was working up to sets of 6 on pause squats was like my weekly thing that I was doing week to week, and then at a prescribed RPE, drop a percentage and repeat sets until I hit the 0.5 over that RPE or something. And I remember the first day I did it, I ended up doing something like 13 sets of 6, just because it was like they didn't get any harder. And I remember coming in for the next training day and being so just unimaginably sore, but I was like, this is the program I'm supposed to train today. Clearly I'm supposed to feel like this. This is how it's supposed to be. I'm gonna do this training day that has fixed weights, and I'm gonna stick to it.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have the concept of auto-regulation on the whole in my mind, and auto-regulation doesn't simply apply to loads or to number of lifts or sets or reps. It also is going to apply to how many rest days you need, or how much food you need to be eating, or different things like that.
Yeah. So let's talk about like the right way to do this. Like, what does flexibility mean when it comes to the training approach as a whole? Like, one thing I want to mention is a good training approach, even a great training approach, is a guideline based on best information of what we think an athlete might be capable of, and different factors, tons of factors, predictable and unpredictable, can influence what that is. And there are lots of good reasons to rearrange a training week or skip a training day or something like that, whether that's sickness or something else. So how do you guys think the concept of flexibility or autoregulation kind of fits in this bigger scheme?
I kind of actually treat flexibility a little bit like I would with periodization of actual lifting itself, right? So with the volume of a program, volume is the highest generally at the beginning of a program or in the beginning phases of a program. And then as you approach the end of it, the volume is getting less and less. And so if you think about flexibility, essentially you start your program with the most and you finish your program with the least. So if you're 2 weeks out from your meet, taking 2 extra rest days and shifting your openers forward to 2 days out from the meet, probably a bad idea. But if you're 13 weeks out from your meet and you feel like you're not prepared to do your training session, take an extra rest day. Take 2 if you need. Or same thing applying to sickness. You know, I always tell people, don't train when you're sick. It's 90% of the time it's only going to make you worse. And I had learned that the hard way by sustaining sicknesses for like 6 weeks at a time when I was a little bit younger and didn't want to miss training days. I was like, no, I can't miss a day. I'll get better. I'll sweat it out, which never works, by the way. And by learning that just, you know, taking 2 days off and eating some extra food and resting and laying under a blanket, I was like, wow, I feel better in 2 days instead of multiple weeks. So the same thing applies there. But if I'm 2 weeks out from a meet, I'm probably just going to train because I require that work in that time frame when I'm closer to the meet. And essentially when I'm not required to meet those training sessions to properly peak for a meet or essentially to nail a certain timing in the actual mesocycle, then I allow for more flexibility if I don't require that.
To add to what Hani was saying, the biggest thing, I mean, probably the most popular question when I first start working with someone is, how do you want me to structure? What days should I be training? And my general response is, make training fit into your lifestyle, not not having your life revolve around training. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that's ever helped me is not structuring my week based on what training I need to do. If I'm going on vacation, I'll try to fit in training, but my focus should be on vacation and those experiences. And if I can fit the training in, awesome. But just allowing yourself to understand that there are other things to life than just your training and making it about that tends to help. So
Yeah.
I think understanding that maybe if you're not used to having like day on, day off, and then you stack 2 days, maybe that second day you're not as recovered, so performance might be impacted, but understanding that, but just making it flexible and being understanding that there's more to your life than just your training.
Chris, you should troll athletes and tell them that the ideal training time is 11:30 a.m. Like, no matter what, training needs to start at 11:30 a.m.
I think it can also help to have athletes understand when they're expected to be fatigued. So if you're setting up the training block for their day ones to be fatigued and not feel so great, it's helpful to have them understand that. You know, if your heavier days are planned on day 3 or day 4, the fatigue from that going into the next week is probably going to affect day 1 for most people. And it's okay if, you know, say sets of 5 at 75% don't feel great. It's a lot of athletes will go through that initially and say, oh, you know, the ship is sinking, everything's going wrong. But it's just more of like a fatigue management type of day, setting you up for a more challenging, heavier day. So I think it's helpful to have athletes understand that going in so that they kind of know what to expect and how to feel. But also on top of that, it's also important to know the difference between when training feels tough and when things are slow and when you're pushing through something that could set you back a little bit.
Eric, that's a good point. It's something that a lot of us have learned through experience, but someone looking at a training approach they've been given just won't know. Like, what's supposed to be easy out of this? What's supposed to be difficult? And if you don't know what's supposed to be difficult and you hit a training session and you freak out because, you know, reps are slow, well, that's going to, you know, affect your expectations of what progress is supposed to be, what appropriate training should be.
Right.
And it won't give you those warning signs when a day that's supposed to be easy actually is difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it really is good to know the difference between that and when you really do need to maybe take like an extra rest day or something like that. One of the things that's been really big for me, even this last training cycle, working with my new coach, Alicia has been very nice with saying, if you feel like you need an extra rest day, taking, as long as you get all your training sessions in within the week, I'm cool with that. Just make sure you're taking it for the right reasons. And so like, versus a day after I had a heavy training session and the next day I might not feel good. That's probably, not the best reason to take an extra day off, but, maybe I had a test that I had to study for, and, maybe I didn't get as much sleep or something like that. Just having that ability to make that judgment call is one of the biggest things that I think is an important skill to have when it comes to, working on your ability to judge when you should be resting versus maybe push through.
I think an important summary of what we're all getting at here is less about the fact that you should be flexible and more about the fact that in being flexible, you're not going to ruin your training. Because ultimately we can all say, oh yeah, your life should be the most important thing. And I say the same thing to my clients, Chris, always. It's make your training fit your life. Don't make your life fit your training. And it's something that I really try to live by. And, it's about understanding that you can still achieve your goals, 100% of your goals, even if you have to move training days around once in a while. Things are going to move on.
In fact, this is an important time to bring up that study about flexible nonlinear training versus the linear system. I think it was done on undergraduate athletes in college, and both of them were given the same exact sessions to do. One group there was like an easy, a medium, and a difficult session. And one group was told to do the medium session, then the easy session, then the difficult session in that order from weeks 1 to 8 or something like that. And the second group, they were told just get these sessions in by the end of the week. When you come in, choose the session that you feel the most ready to perform. And they both made progress, of course, but the group that was the flexible nonlinear group ended up making better progress overall, probably because they were just optimizing their fatigue recovery. So that's kind of just proving the point that we're all after. But I think this is interesting in leading to another one of the crappy things that I've done before. It's just absolutely crumbling when something didn't go right. And that boils down for me to expectations, to feeling like things were supposed to go a certain way, to them not turning out that way, and to me absolutely freaking out and just thinking like, I'm never going to get stronger. Is this the strongest I'll ever get? I'm not making progress. What's going on? And then just going through a list of a dozen reasons why or why not, I may not be making progress. And I've learned to kind of temper that and cool down a little bit and take the long view and just realize that, yeah, progress is coming. There's going to be great days and there's going to be bad days, and things march on.
That's kind of something that Mike Toucher touched on in their recent podcast with the RTS. Basically, a lot of athletes have the problem of setting lofty goals in a very strict time frame where maybe eventually they'll achieve that goal, but if they need to squat 500 pounds in 8 weeks and they don't do it, then they're just setting themselves up for disappointment. Even if long term their structure is still their training is still going well, they're just setting lofty goals for a very strict time frame that's maybe not too realistic.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And when it comes to that, I think Mike's point of the time frame being somewhat irrelevant is largely applicable. Like, what happens if you hit your goal sooner than expected? Like, there's no extra upshot. And then if you hit your goal later than expected, you're just crushed because you set a specific mark to hit and you missed that mark.
Right.
And it just has a lot of frustrations with no upshots. That said, like, where do you guys stand in terms of like setting numeric goals? Like, do you think that's important? Do you think you should tie it to a time frame, or do you think you should kind of just leave it open-ended? Like, this is a number I want, but I just don't care when it comes. Like, is that right either?
I kind of have a little bit of experience with this in that, as you guys know, but everybody listening probably doesn't, I've dealt with a lot of knee issues over these last few years, and it's, especially when they first started, It was really disappointing to me because I had set the goals in my head as far as numeric numbers that I wanted to achieve with a time frame. Like by this month, I wanted to squat X number of pounds. And just because I had that limiting factor, I was just kind of beating myself up mentally because I was saying, if only I didn't have this limitation, I'd be meeting these goals and I'd be where I want to be right now. And it's taken me, again, probably until recently to realize that, setting myself up for a goal within a specific time frame and absolutely expecting myself to meet that goal no matter what isn't always the best way to work towards that goal, and instead just maybe focus on progressing and continually progressing, and even small little victories like 2.5 kilo PRs. I celebrate those now, and I think that's been a really good lesson for me to learn, and I think that's something that everybody else should learn too, is that every little bit of progress is a victory.
It's definitely an interesting question, and I think what Mike was saying is if you're training for a meet and you have that coming up, you're going to train as hard as possible for that meet regardless of what your numeric goals are. But I don't think that's true for everybody, especially people that aren't prepping or just kind of novice intermediate athletes that are just trying to get stronger. I think those numeric goals can be a destination for them and can be kind of a driving force for them to work harder in their own training and give them some kind of direction. So I think there's kind of pros and cons to that. It's definitely easy to get too tied up in those numeric goals, but I think for some people it can be a nice motivating factor of something to work towards.
If there really is no meet on the horizon, not even a training test, like that might be a great motivator. Like,
right.
For all of us, we can remember times where there wasn't something coming up on the horizon and training just felt a little bit aimless. Just kind of like, yeah, I'm doing this, but what's it all for? So Eric, to your point, maybe giving back that goal by applying a number to it is really important for some people.
Yeah,
I think it definitely is for some people.
I think it also might have to do a little bit with how realistic it is too. Some people might set it a little bit too high,
Mm-hmm.
But if you're squatting 315 and you're like, I want to squat 500 in 8 weeks, that's probably not realistic.
Better contact TSA.
We can make that
happen. So another way that I messed up in the past is just a little bit more general, but it's just being generally way too gullible in believing what people said, especially anyone that was stronger than me was saying. Whether or not they were on steroids, whether or not they were even competing in the same sport that I was. If they were stronger than me at a specific lift, I would try to take their advice when it came to whatever they were saying. And that can be really damaging. Number one, because you're just pulled in, way too many different directions. And number two, because you don't have a filter for what good information actually is. So real quick, the halo effect is a psychological term. Basically, you are more likely to believe people who you ascribe a specific quality to, a quality of being popular or having achieved a certain result or something like that, and then being more likely to believe what they're saying is true instead of viewing what they're saying in the context of whether or not it's true in itself. And so I was just way, way too susceptible to what was going in, and it's just problematic. Do you guys ever remember times where you believed people for like the dumbest things they were saying, but they were stronger, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, basically any information I originally got with regards to like classical conjugate training. I swear to you, I did box squats with like 55% of my max for months, and no deadlifting in my training. It was like all good mornings, and I think at some point I put in RDLs, and that was as exciting as the deadlift got. But like there was zero pulling from the floor, and the only full squats that I did was like 2 weeks out of every 8. And even then, I think it was with bands or something. And so it was just I mean, looking at it now, I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? How could I possibly think that would work? And it's I can kind of see through my eyes back then, and it was like, well, all these super strong guys are using it, so obviously it does something, right? You know, they wouldn't be doing it if it didn't work for them. And you know, I think it's that it worked in spite of it being a subpar kind of training methodology for most raw lifters, at least in its purest forms. I know, Bryce, that you did a very large portion of your early training years in conjugate of a style where you kind of had a heavier day and a lighter day. Yeah. But yours was definitely more geared towards raw lifting, since you weren't doing box squats and you were actually doing the competition lifts on a regular basis. But more or less, just with regards to training programs in particular, it's like, just because person A, person B, or person C says that it's effective, this templated training program doesn't mean that it's going to work for everyone. You always have to take it kind of in context, like what kind of people are getting stronger off of that program. And, you know, just because they got stronger off that program doesn't mean that that's the program that was going to make them the strongest they could have been in that period of time. And so it's just an interesting dynamic that you see a lot. You really, really see a lot.
So, you know, I want to bring up, like, okay, well, what's the alternative? If you're not just going to believe the biggest guy in the gym, what are you going to believe? Like, what's a good practice? And I think it's important to realize that considering claims off the basis of whether or not they're true, and the system that is designed to filter those is science, you know, is exercise science and related fields. And that's one of the reasons why we care about that, is because it helps us determine truth from fiction, instead of just believing what people say at face value, is believing what something says, whether or not it's actually true based on the best information that we know of. So, you know, you hear people talk about evidence-based coaching, and I think that's really at the core of it, is trying to put in practices based on the best information that all of humanity has, you know, in our collected wisdom.
And the nice part with that is, compared to 5 to 10 years ago, quality information where you can apply, you know, evidence-based type of stuff is a lot more readily available now compared to how it was back then. So it's very easy to go on the internet now and find quality information in regards to strength training. Whereas, you know, 5, 10 years ago, you'd have to sift through a lot of T-Nation garbage and stuff like that to really find what you were looking for. So it was hard to know what was good and what wasn't.
Eric, I think you're right, and I also think we're a little bit spoiled because of how easy it is to find good information. Like, let's go back even further, you know, 20 years ago, where maybe you had to get really lucky and find someone who was into research journals or had access to a university or something like that, and who was willing to share that kind of stuff. Or the alternative, I guess, is the biggest guy at the gym, or
right.
You know, looking through Iron Man magazine or whatever the case may be, and finding Flex magazine and finding some article there. Like,
Jay Cutler's diet, eating a loaf of bread at every meal.
Arnold's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, you know?
I got an interesting experience with this. 2 words: couch sit-ups. So back before I even started touching weights, I was a chubby kid, and all I wanted was abs to impress the girls.
Logical.
Logical, obviously. So the first thing I did was just Google Google how to get a 6-pack. And I'm not going to shout the website out because it's still a thing today, but there was this guy who, he obviously had abs, and he was touting the way to do it was to do sit-ups with your feet tucked under your couch. Just, he had that was what he touted, and that was like what I did to start, and it was only solely because he had a 6-pack. Then that was my confirmation. That was all I needed to know. So you never know.
Probably more effective than couch laydowns, though.
True.
Upcoming TSA program.
Those are actually Eric's specialty.
I mean, a lot of these things had some kernel of truth in them, but then there was just a lot of personal opinion stuck in, about what they liked or something like that.
Yeah.
So, does any one of you guys want to go on another mistake that you learned from?
Actually, something that comes up from, we had kind of made collective lists of this earlier, was focusing on minute details that are completely irrelevant. Supplements being the one that really stuck out to me. I was a member on the bodybuilding.com forums, like we all were at some point, and I repped for a supplement company in the promo section and everything for years. And I mean, once I got past like the first 20% of my time on there, I kind of understood. I was like, most of this stuff is totally nonsense, and I kind of took it for what it was. Like, pre-workouts are great because they give you extra energy to train. It's like, but that equal amount of caffeine in the form of coffee, it's going to give you a similar energy feel, maybe without a couple of the perks you get from the water band ingredients that are in there that are other stimulants. But like, by and large, you're getting a lot of the same things from that thing that you feel when you take the pre-workout. Take one without caffeine, you don't feel it. It's the caffeine. And so but then you look at things like testosterone boosters and fancy creatine blends and non-hormonal anabolics and plant steroids and things like that are legal, but are just complete garbage. Like, people just taking your money, really is what it is. And I mean, unfortunately, I bought into that for a while, and I remember being like 16 and having my first job, and I would get like a $250 biweekly paycheck, and I would be so excited that I could go buy myself some more supplements, and it would be like, oh, I'm gonna go get some ecdysterone, and which, by the way, is like one of the most expensive complete bunk supplements of all time. And it an adaptogen, by the way, because our bodies can't adapt on their own, and is basically what that was touted as. And just so much money I wasted on that stuff, expecting it for it to take me to the next level. And I mean, aside from the basics, like, we obviously we want to have a good intake of healthy dietary fats that you get from like fish oil. You want to take vitamin D3. You want to get some of the ingredients that are in a multivitamin if you don't get them in your diet. And like, creatine monohydrate is actually verified to increase performance. And if you're an endurance athlete, like beta alanine. But like, outside the scope of that, and maybe a few select others, you're really kind of burning money. I mean, maybe some people like that, and you know what? If you get, I'm a strong believer in certain types of the placebo effect with regards to pre-workouts and things like that. If you feel like that better pump makes you stronger from taking all those nitrates that are in your pre-workout that give me a headache, by all means, go for it. But for the most part, it's like I spend almost zero money aside from like protein and pre-workout. That's like the sum total of what I buy for supplements now, and it amazes me how much some people spend on that stuff. Or I've had multiple people ask me as a coach now, they're like, man, what should I take? And I'm like, you should take really great care in how you do your training is what you should do. Because there's so much more involved in how you eat, how you train, how you rest, and maybe 1%, maybe 3%, let's be liberal here, maybe 3% would be what you could gain from the perfect supplementation regime. And so it's just funny to me.
I mean, it's funny for sure, but we've all been through that. We've all come out the other side, thankfully, with some guidance from mentors and people who care about us and our wallets, to just realize, like, oh, like, we've been there too. There's all these supplements. They're flashy. They have labels. They have claims and, people backing them and stuff. I remember going to the Arnold in 2015, this last year in March, and going through the supplement, the booth side of things, and just being blown away at like how just flashy everything is, and how big these displays are, and how long the lines are, and just everyone just trying to push stuff at you. It was like being in Las Vegas. It was crazy.
I actually, I went to the Olympia Expo, which is in Vegas, a couple years back, probably in like 2013 or 2014 or something. And GAT, German-American, whatever, supplement company, actually had stripper poles in their booth. It was like they had pole dancing girls. And I visited that booth. I wanted some samples. But it's marketing. We all basically just bought into fundamental human psychology, and in some fancy way they told us that this is going to work for us, and so we're like, okay, and so we used it. And so it's not like we did some wrong, but it's just an interesting thing to observe. And it's pretty much universally, everybody has like a supplement obsession period in their training.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a poll here if we need to do some advertising.
Oh, is that one attached to the ceiling, Eric?
No, it's a lamp.
If it is attached to the ceiling.
TSA announcement, Bodhorn _ TSA now providing pole dance coaching.
Hey, it's Eric _ TSA. Get it right.
Oh, excuse me, Eric. At Eric _ Bodhorn is the pole dancing page.
Right. That's the other one.
Bodhorny _ TSA.
So yeah, I want to impress on whoever's listening that finding ways to think better / more clearly is really important. So that when you're thrown a claim of someone trying to get something from you, whether it's your time or your money or your attention or whatever the case may be, that you have a way to filter out these causes and, which ones are valid and which ones aren't. There's a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which kind of goes over in some detail some of the common cognitive biases that we can fall victim to. And hopefully by reading them, you can kind of be a little bit more practiced when you come across things and be able to apply this stuff in real life. Because theory is great, but being able to pull this stuff out in real time when you're faced with a situation is, for me, the important thing. So, I want to kind of segue into another common mistake, and that's being too dismissive of just the boring stuff, the fundamentals. It's super easy looking at the flashy exercise that's going to add, X pounds to your total, or the timing or the rep scheme or whatever it is, and just completely glossing over the boring stuff. How much volume you're doing over time, progressive adaptation, allowing adequate time for recovery. Eric, can you speak on that?
Yeah, I think we've all gone through periods where we focus on really everything but training, trying to find that one thing that's really going to take us to the next level. So, a few years ago, maybe it was specializing in mobility, watching every K-Star video and, this is what's really going to take my squat to the next level, doing all these hip openers and all this crazy stuff with bands that in most cases you don't need to do. So yeah, I think we've all gone through phases like that where we don't really prioritize training, or we don't prioritize the competition lifts as much as we really should in order to make progress. Yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think the pendulum swings a little bit when we're talking about intensity or volume or specificity or these things like that. But, at its core, we know that progressive adaptation is important, said principle, adequate rest and stuff like that. And really, in powerlifting, we get off easy because there's one main variable that we're trying to modify, and that's an athlete's strength. We don't have to worry about endurance or speed or, other things. So yeah, that's a good point.
Bryce, to that point, one of the things that I don't think you mentioned on that list that a lot of, especially if we're coming at this from the idea of the beginner athlete, I think something that people sometimes nowadays will overlook is they won't always take the time to really master their technique. They focus a ton on, I want to be stronger now, and they might try to progress a little bit faster than they're necessarily ready for, and that might result in them getting injured earlier, or maybe just even burning out because they try to progress too fast and they don't, or something like that. So I think that that's something that we should definitely think about when we're coming at the beginning athlete.
Yeah, for sure.
I something to add on to that, Joe. I think that you're not wrong, but it's also that really, really efficient technique on all the lifts. And efficient's a funny thing because we've spent a fair amount of time, us collectively, trying to define what exactly an efficient lift means. I can look at a squat and I'm like, wow, that guy moves really efficiently, but I can't really quantify that. Mm-hmm. And but to develop that, to have a lift that looks efficient and suits your bodily proportions and essentially is going to be what could be considered mastery of a lift. To have a lift that achieves that, it's not just a matter of instructing someone on the things they have to do for it. It's tens of thousands of reps of doing those movements. And it's one of the challenges I face sometimes, very, very, very occasionally. But if I have a new client who's seeking technique help specifically, a lot of times it's less of do this, this, and this, and more of don't do this, this, and this, and continue following the program as prescribed. And so long as you don't have these bad habits, right? You don't have excessive knee valgus, you don't have rounding in your lower back while you're squatting, you have effective bracing, you're breathing into your belt properly, you have a good shelf for the bar on your upper back, then essentially over time your body is going to gradually develop a more efficient squat, because as you demand more of it, you're going to physically have to find ways to do more. And so I would say focusing less on the idea of perfect technique in the early stages and focusing more on the idea of not having injury directed technique. And so like avoiding the bad habits that with overuse can lead to injury.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really explain that point correctly, but the experience that I have with that is when I first started squatting, I mean, you guys will probably remember even like a year ago, I just would dive into the hole with squats, and that was just always the habit that I had formed, and I didn't pay enough attention to that sort of thing. So like how you're saying, just making sure you're not forming bad technique habits is probably a better way to put that point.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you both. I think that early on, you've got to get to a point that's good enough, and then you can kind of work from there as like this base model that you can adjust from. And to just, I know it sounds cliche, but to listen to your body. If every time you step under the bar, you've got rear delt pain, that should be a red flag that something needs to change and you've got to adjust. Because that kind of thing is not sustainable. And sometimes athletes either believe themselves or they're told like this is part of powerlifting, like low bar squatting is part of powerlifting, or no pain, no gain, that kind of mentality can really wind you up into trouble. So
yeah, that's very true.
Do you guys have any other specific things that happened to you in your past that you've learned from? We can touch on those, and then we can talk about some kind of generalized tips as well.
I know Chris has a great story about some very top level attempt selection at his first meet.
I was just thinking about that.
Bring it on, Chris.
So obviously, first competition, didn't know any better. I was training with some guys that were powerlifting at my gym. Decided to do the meet. Didn't have anyone that kind of like led me in, or what should openers be? What should my attempts be? So basically, I had based my attempts, and it was very fixed. I was like, okay, I've hit 375 in the gym. Let's plan for 380, and that was the goal. So I took, I think 335 was my second attempt, and narrowly actually got through my sticking point, and then decided to go up 45 pounds to 380. And lo and behold, I got pinned onto the ground. So it was fun. And
Chris, how did that bar feel like after just barely getting your second attempt? How did it feel even walking out plus 45 pounds?
Well, I don't remember that, but what I actually do remember, and actually I pulled up the video before we started recording, I was squatting in a model lift, and there are no spotters at all. I have no one around me, and I'm pinned on the ground with 380 pounds in my back, and someone comes running into the frame. Cue video here.
For perspective, for anyone listening to this right now, a 20-kilo jump is like a jump that you would give Ray Williams on a squat, not something that you would give Christopher Aydin, who doesn't squat in pounds, or who didn't squat in pounds what Ray squats in kilos. And so it's hilarious that would have happened.
Well, speaking of attempt selection, my old newbie strategy used to be like hit your last warm up as your first attempt, hit your current PR on your second attempt, and go for a PR on your third attempt. For 3 meets, I think I did that. And
sounds legit.
I got lucky that I had made progress to substantiate that, but that's in no way sustainable. Specifically, well, Hanny's smirking on the screen here.
No, I was just giving it a little bit of sarcasm, like, it worked. But there's a lot of great resources out there on attempt selection. I know Matt Gary has an article that is reasonably old at this point, but still just as valid, that he did for, I think it did say Maryland Powerlifting is the website or something. Yeah. And that's a great resource. I know that was the original starting point for most of us when it comes to like what actual numbers to pick. I've written a couple articles personally on the TSA page or for Power Magazine that have been on attempt selection, and it's just the sum of it being, and it really depends on your goal for the meet, right? If your goal is to go to the meet and to do big lifts and set PRs, then do that. But if your goal is to go to the meet and you're in tight contention with someone else for placing, making lifts matters, and so it's always more fun, right? Like if you leave a meet having hit PRs on all 3 lifts and made all 9 attempts, that's a pretty good feeling. I mean, I've only ever done that one time, and that was awesome. And I know, Bryce, you had an issue previously where historically, prior to moving up to 105, you had some interesting experiences with attempts just kind of not going quite to plan. The weight cut was always tough for you, and obviously 230 is a much more comfortable weight class for you. And it's interesting to see how just smarter choices, kind of listening to your body, picking what's realistic. It's amazingly satisfying when you get to the end of it and you actually made the lifts instead of missing what you had in mind.
Yeah, speaking of, you can find that article that Hani is talking about at thestrengthathlete.com/resources, along with a bunch of other links to good stuff on attempt selection and biomechanics and on down the list of helpful topics. There's
a really easy to use attempt selection spreadsheet on there too, with a almost fully functional warm-up page built into it.
We just fixed it. Actually, I have to upload the fixed one.
Okay. So at this point, it is still almost fully functional when we are recording this. So I'm not a total ass.
Well, I think you touched on it with Bryce's weight cut to 93 before he went up to 105. I think, I've felt guilty of this for even still to this day, and I think this is probably going to be my 13th meet that I'm actually, I'm trying to cut down, and if I make weight based on what I am a week out, I will do it, but let's focus on actually what my weight is. And I actually had a discussion with one of my athletes about this. It's like one of those things that powerlifting is about lifting the most weight possible. And unless you're in the top 1% and you're fighting for contention and winning, I think showing up on meet day and being strong and focusing less on what weight class you compete in goes a long way. And I think I would say probably a lot of beginners and more intermediates focus so much on what weight class they're competing on rather than what their performance will be like.
Yeah, and I think that results for a few reasons. Like people tie their identity to a specific weight class or to a specific competitor in that weight class, and they have trouble separating themselves from that and thinking about performance in the long haul, and being afraid that gained weight is just gained weight and not also gained strength. How do I have any type of guarantee that's going to happen? Is it really going to substantiate moving up a weight class? Like, look at all the people in that weight class. It's so scary up there. And those kind of things can keep people from making the right decision for too long.
I think I remember having that discussion with you prior to moving up to 105, Bryce, because it was basically when Jesse Norris had decided to come over and compete in USAPL, and we were like, we need to bring back 83 kilo Bryce prior to John Hack being a thing, or we need to have you move up to 105. Like it was like a serious discussion. We were having an intervention with Bryce, like, dude, you need to give up. Stop with the 93 nonsense. It's never going to happen.
So we had this rumor that Jesse Norris was going to compete at USA Nationals. And like we were just making all these assumptions, like, oh, if he competes, then maybe I'll go down to 83s, or this and this person's in 83s, and maybe I'll just go up to 105s. Oh, that's really bad. So I'm telling Sarah about this, and she listens to me. Sarah's my wife. She listens to me and she's like, well, why don't you just ask him? And I'm like, I don't know. I just didn't even think to ask him. So I just messaged him one day. I'm like, hey, Jesse, you competing? He's like, yeah. I'm like, all right, peace out, 93s. So I moved up to 105s. Jesse, you're a super strong guy. Kudos to you. And I hope you decide to go to Belarus.
Yeah, we all do. That would be pretty cool. I think Christoph from Poland probably moved up to 105 specifically just because Jesse is now a 93.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. So general tips. Oh, Eric, go ahead, man.
Yeah, it's actually a general tip. I just had another piece of advice to kind of throw out there. So I think it's something that it can be difficult for us as coaches too, but I would say it's really important to treat yourself as an athlete. And I don't mean that in the sense of going into each training session with a do or die mentality, but more so in the sense of doing the little things for preparation and recovery, between training sessions to set yourself up for long-term strength and health. And it kind of goes back to what we talked about in the previous podcast with Quinn, doing your warm-ups properly, making sure you're prepared for each session, and then cooling down after each session. Just little things like that you wouldn't think are important, but they can add up over time.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I try to kind of shortcut that by thinking about a world-class track athlete or a world-class volleyball athlete, and how much stuff happens before the match starts or the game starts, and just trying to take little bits of that for myself. But that's 100% true. I think because powerlifting is kind of close to just going to the gym and lifting, it's hard to separate it as a sport in itself and kind of carry some of these behaviors that would really benefit you. But it doesn't make it any less important.
To be clear, Bryce, powerlifting is just going to the gym.
Well, that's what competing is too, right? It's just doing it in a different place.
It's just in a hotel instead of in a gym.
Yeah, exactly.
Just in front of judges.
Right.
But yeah, powerlifting is definitely a long game, and if you look at kind of the top of the sport right now, it's not always the people with the best genetics. Obviously, it helps to have genetics that are geared towards being strong, but a lot of the older lifters that have been in the game for a while, they're really just people that have managed to stay healthy for a long period of time and continue to be progressive with their training.
Dave Ricks is a great example. I remember this Raw Nationals, looking at the numbers that he was slated for, and I was like, where the hell did this come from? Because he didn't compete at the previous Raw Nationals. I think he was injured the year before, and prior to that, he was an equipped competitor. Because basically, if you were a top level competitor, you were competing equipped prior to like 2014. And I remember seeing his numbers and just thinking, where the hell did this guy come from? and it's just Dave had been injured, and he was just that strong and possibly even stronger before, and he wears those magical deadlift shoes, and he for anyone who doesn't know, Dave deadlifts in like white K-Swiss, and it's just they're just like really. Are they Nikes? Okay, yeah. Awesome looking, just white comfy shoes.
Actually, they're Nikes.
excuse me, the sneakerhead of the group, but
it's his own signature model.
Yeah, the shoes that every dad wears.
The Superman 4s, but but Dave is tremendously strong. He's a Masters 2 lifter, right? He's in his or 3.
He's 59, I believe.
2.
So he's in his 50s and one of the strongest 93 kilo competitors in the whole world. Dave is obviously an outlier. Most people by the time they are approaching their 60s aren't really at the top of their game anymore. But it's interesting to observe men versus women. Women tend to actually hit their peaks a little bit later. So you look at like Marissa Inda, Jennifer Thompson as a couple examples who come directly to mind. They're both Masters level lifters at this point. And they're both still getting better. Mm-hmm. And Jennifer's at the top of the class and has been for years now. It sounds like she's actually going to be challenged by Jennifer Milliken this year, which should be interesting. But you look at her and you look at Marissa, and Marissa especially lately has made some training changes that are absolutely just kind of lighting her on fire with their progress, and it's really cool to see that they can do so well, so advanced into their careers and as such high level lifters later on. Obviously, genetics play a huge role with regards to Jennifer Thompson's bench. She is the best bencher in the world, but it's interesting to observe that she's still been able to drive progress, even if it's 1 pound a year. It's still cool to see that she can keep moving.
That's a perfect example of like, when you talk about that diagram of, you're going to make, faster progress as a beginner, and then it slows down as an intermediate, and then when you're at advanced, it's like, at a crawl as you approach your genetic C, and like Jennifer's literally adding like a half pound in long stretches of time to her bench press, because I think she's pretty close to like the limit of what she is capable of. So it's funny to see that actually in practice.
Yeah, that's good old Mother Earth giving everyone else a chance to catch her bench, Wilkes.
So here's a few general topics I want to throw out. I want to know what you guys, your thoughts are. General tips for newer lifters when it comes to approach to tough sessions. What happens when you have a tough session?
That's an interesting topic for me, as this is something that I still that I'm kind of better at now, but for a long time. And I was actually just talking to Chad Smith about this the other day. When I was a novice, I would go in and I would have a session, and it was like the weight never really meant anything to me. I didn't really associate like what's heavy, and so I would like work up through my warm ups, and my work set would be like squats with 405 or something, and it would be sets of 4. Let's say, and I would just, work up to it and do it. I didn't really think about it at all. And that was probably a better time in my training in a way, because I didn't waste like 9 minutes trying to mentally prepare myself for my top set. But now I go into the gym and 405 is a warm up at this point, but to be able to before I get ready for that, I have to actually like kind of think about it and get ready and like get myself kind of amped up. And I don't know if it's because I'm older and the mechanism needs more time to warm up or something, but it's just it's interesting. I feel like I train more intelligently now, but it's almost like I respect the weights a little bit more, and so it's going up to my top sets. I have more care in how I approach them, and then when it comes to really heavy sets like maximal stuff like that, whereas previously I would just willy-nilly be like, oh hell yeah, let's max today. Now it's like, I don't know about that. I could probably get hurt, and I don't think I want to do that today. And so it's been an interesting change for me. Respecting the weight, probably the best way to summarize it. That despite things getting heavier, the same weights that I would have just jumped under before, I kind of take time to approach them in a more calculated manner now.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite changes that I've made myself over years is developing a ritual to the training session and developing a ritual to the lift. So every workout starts with the same warm-up, and every lift starts with the same pieces. So, when I squat, I'll put my hands in the same place, I'll breathe, I'll come under the bar, my left foot is forward, and my right foot will meet my left, and I'll unrack the bar, blah, 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 like all these ritual things. That being repeatable has made me a lot more comfortable approaching heavier loads because it's the same thing.
I have a cool little video on the TSA channel actually now. It was a video I made like my first 6 months of TSA, so back in 2014, I think.
Baby Hani.
Little Hani. Back when I had a really skinny face because I wasn't quite so fat. But that whole video is actually on consistency and repeatability, so if you haven't watched it, I would highly recommend it.
Nice.
But I think understanding that bad days do happen. For example, like you get out of bed some days and it just seems like anything you do, it's the wrong thing. You stub your toe, you fall over, you smash your phone's the screen on your phone.
That's a bad day.
That's a really bad day.
But life happens,
yeah.
And I think it's frustrating. No one wants to go into a training session, have it go poorly, or feel weak and not feel strong and not perform up to what they want to perform at. But using that to reflect on, and I think is really important.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think if you go through a tough training session, it's probably a good time to panic and find a new coach. No, no, like Chris was saying, I think it's important to understand the context of maybe why that session didn't go well. So maybe you were sick a few days prior to that, and your nutrition was off. You didn't sleep very well. Being able to understand that those things do happen, and we're not all completely invincible in every training session. That's something that we were kind of talking about before we started the podcast. We've all gone through phases where we felt we were invincible in training, but as you go through a given training block, maybe there's going to be a situation where you run into that, and it's something that you have to be able to understand the context of it.
For real.
Yeah. My favorite thing for tough training sessions that I've, especially over the past year, has been getting like really good music that might help me match my mood of the day. So especially like, for example, if I'm feeling under recovered, I find that putting on a song that just makes me feel, I don't know, happy, or something that I might like to sing along to, or whatever. 100% Bieber. No, for me, it's actually it's usually Broadway of some kind. Highly recommend A Brand New Day from The Wiz. But just something like that might be able to brighten my mood. Maybe not necessarily. Not that you shouldn't respect the weight, like you said, Handy, but maybe not be thinking so much about the weight and more just, be like, not too serious about it.
Yeah, I remember watching. It was either the X Games or it was one of the Olympics where they had snowboarding, and seeing some of the people up at the top of the mountain and hearing some of the interviews with these high-level snowboarding athletes who would do a crossword puzzle or a Sudoku puzzle as they were like waiting to literally go down the mountain and launch 20 feet up into the air and spin 4 times, because that calmed them and because it centered them and got them not to think about what they were about to do. Or other people who just put on a jam and head down the mountain. And I think those kinds of strategies are important. We can carry little bits of those into our sport. So another topic that I think applies to a lot of people, and this is something that in a future episode on sports psychology I want to talk more about, is comparison with other athletes, comparison with your peers. Comparison can be positive, it can be negative, but I want to speak specifically about the negative aspects of it. When you get down on yourself about your progress or your lack of progress because you look at your gym buddy, or you look at the national champion or whatever, and you think less of yourself as a result. Have you guys had personal experiences with that?
Well, I think that's probably the biggest reason that people get tied to certain weight classes, is they see people that they train with or people on Instagram that can do a certain thing at a certain body weight, and if they can't do that, they feel inferior, or they feel like they have to be at a certain level before they compete because, they're at this weight and they can't do this yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's kind of the big driving force for why people get stuck to a certain weight.
That's why I think that class system that USA Powerlifting adopted from the European system is a really cool thing, because it can dissociate people from just looking at the top people, and you can focus on, starting off as a class 4 lifter and becoming a class 3 lifter, and then just kind of moving up and targeting those specific goals. So you don't have to worry about people, you just kind of worry about numbers.
Mm.
Yeah, I can recall a time when I remember, even I think back when, I don't know, maybe powerlifting wasn't as popular on Instagram, and I remember I would post a PR of mine, and it wouldn't be anything amazing, but I remember being so elated that I got that PR. And then nowadays, like, it's kind of like a drop in the bucket, and you see all these other people, and it almost makes you feel not as accomplished, because you're just like, I just got this, but look at all these people who are lifting this much weight.
Yeah, it can be really, it's almost like when you achieve a PR like that, and you display it to the world, you're putting yourself out there, and if you happen to get negative feedback, it hurts, because you expected to be embraced, or to have felt good as a result. Maybe you didn't get the result you were hoping for, and it hurts because you kind of made yourself vulnerable for a minute there. So it's important to find kind of supportive communities who will support your progress as your progress, and not your progress compared to Dave Ricks or Jesse Norris or whoever else you want to choose out of the crowd.
Definitely.
And a lot of times when you post a lift, you'll get the people that come in and say, "Oh, this number next," instead of actually congratulating the accomplishment. Like I think I remember when Bryce first pulled 750 or something like that, everyone was commenting, "Oh, 800 soon, right around the corner," and it's like, maybe not.
That's really true, and that's something that I didn't realize until you just said it. Is saying oh, this number next is disregarding what the person just did,
right.
And that's important to realize. It's a great point. So how about, I guess we can do a full separate podcast on attempt selection. What about enjoyment to training? All this stuff about progress. Where does having fun with it fit into the picture? What do you do when you're not having fun? Should you be having fun every session? Should it just be challenging? When do you feel fun, enjoyment?
It's not supposed to be fun. We're supposed to be training robots.
I mean, I know I'm being facetious when I say this, but I think a lot of people forget, don't be so competitive with things early on. Enjoy what you're doing. And if you're not, especially early on, find ways to make sure that's happening, because you'll experience burnout faster than blowing out a candle.
Yeah, like going on the training that I did early in my training career, where I was doing a bunch of different things. Obviously, that wasn't the best way to go in terms of getting stronger, but I did really enjoy the training that I was doing at that time, and that at the time that was what was most important to me. So I think in some aspects, finding enjoyment in your own training can be useful, especially in terms of longevity in the sport.
Don't get me wrong. I think let's not forget that there are going to be sessions where it's not going to be fun. You're going to get to a point where fatigue is fatigue is high. You're not well recovered. The weights, the intensity is increasing. The volume's still there, and those are the days that you just have to put in the work. But in the early stages of training, where the intensity and the volume is kind of moderate, I think that's a big part. And if you're not enjoying training, I can probably guarantee that there's consistency, or you're missing sessions, or you're not. You can find any excuse not to go train because it's not something you're looking forward to.
Yeah.
So I think enjoying training is a big part of it, and we can create as coaches a great approach on paper. But if an athlete is not finding it enjoyable, it's not going to work out. And I think enjoying training should be a big part of it, but understanding that there are going to be days or weeks where you're just like, got to get the work in.
Yeah, I think athletes are masters of delayed gratification, and especially high-level athletes are masters of delayed gratification, where you can quote-unquote suffer for a long time until you realize the fruits of your labor, and that's kind of your relationship with the sport, that you experience these strong emotional highs and then long periods of maybe not as high gratification. So if we graft enjoyment over time, maybe it's like under 4s for most of your time training, and then it's like 10 for a few days or even a few minutes, and that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely.
So how about nutrition? And I guess we'll say nutrition, then maybe one more topic, but advice to newer powerlifters specifically when it comes to nutrition.
Eat.
Yeah.
Stop dieting.
Good.
Eat and stop dieting. It's that's super underrated advice, but obviously there's a point where dieting is for your own health, but for the most part, it's if you give yourself an opportunity to kind of grow the muscle in those novice phases, especially, you're going to experience a much better effect down the line, if just from having additional skeletal muscle on your frame. And obviously in a long enough time frame, you may put on the same amount, but in those earlier phases, you kind of want to take advantage of the fact that you're growing at a rate that you'll never match again. And maximizing that in pretty much every way possible is something that I would absolutely focus on. If I could redo my novice years of training, I would absolutely focus on kind of stuff in my face and probably getting a little bit fatter than I did, going on the Joe bulk as it were. And
great, now it's a Joe bulk.
Congrats, Joe.
You are the dreamer, sir. But we spent a lot of time focusing on stuff that has since become, no longer commonly accepted by at least people in our community, like meal timing and things like that, where, you had to eat every 2 hours, or you were worried that you were going to kind of limit your ability to make gains that day. Yeah. But it's amazing to see the little things that we would focus on before that just don't matter anymore. I mean, intermittent fasting is a great counterexample to the old meal timing camp. There are people who eat one big meal per day with all of their calories, all of their carbs, all their fat, all their protein, and have completely comparable nutritional effect in terms of performance to what we get eating, 3. I probably usually have 3, sometimes 3 in a snack, or 4. And there are some people have 5, some people have 8. It's just, it varies. And it's, the best way to kind of slice that up is in the manner that suits your day best. And so if you happen to have 3 time frames a day where it's convenient for you to have a meal, and you find that eating in those 3 time frames gives you the most energy throughout your day, you're probably best served by 3 meals. And if you are someone who gets up at 4 in the morning to work, and you like to get started with a cup of coffee, and you don't want to eat anything until 4 p.m. when you get home, then intermittent fasting might be the thing for you. And so it's just about having the flexibility with regards to nutrition to understand that there is no perfect approach when it comes to details like that.
So, Hani, I'm a brand new powerlifter. I just learned what a squat was last week. What should I do nutritionally?
Keto.
Give me a little bit more specifics about what I should be doing. Like, what are the important things I need to know?
No carbs. Honestly, the things I usually like to break it down into when it comes to most trainees, I try to keep it simple, right? Because I'm not trying to give someone a dietary template. If they're looking for something like that, there are plenty of very qualified people providing things like that. Like the people at Renaissance Periodization, for example, they that's what the P stands for in Renaissance, right? Periodization.
Yep.
Okay. Just had to make sure. But I have them focus on simple things like consuming more of their carbohydrates around when they're training so they can have kind of that readily available blood sugar to provide the energy they need to do their lifts. Maximizing their fat intake on off days, comparatively speaking, with the same amount of calories, having a little more protein on those off days so you can be a little more full. You can focus on, you aren't going to have those excess carbohydrates that you don't really need on the off days. And especially when dieting, that's a really effective way to kind of make things work a little better. But you're maximizing recovery on training days by having those carbs around training sessions, and just those simple guidelines. And one additionally that I like for people who maybe this applies more to general population, and is just a really, really simple one for someone who doesn't want to track their food, is from a physical standpoint, always make the protein the biggest visual piece of your meal. And it's such a simple thing that so few people actually do. And even just that, and eat it first, just that kind of helps people to control how much they eat. Usually, I'll also give kind of a guideline on protein. The number varies depending on whether we're dieting or kind of focusing on gaining weight. For someone gaining weight, a little bit less is more, since carbs tend to be kind of protein sparing. So usually somewhere between like 0.8 and 1 gram per pound of body weight is a very loose rule of thumb. And then for someone who's dieting, I find that going higher has more effect. This is kind of a thing I picked up from Alberto. I was as high as 300 grams a day at one point when I weighed like 180. And I don't know that I needed quite that much, but we just found that when I had that higher protein intake, my training in general just seemed to be easier and I seemed to recover better. Mm-hmm. So it kind of takes the inverse approach to my calorie balance. So if I'm in a calorie deficit, I have higher protein levels, somewhere between like 1 and 1.5 grams per pound body weight is probably reasonable, with the higher end being for people who are probably a little bit more on the fatter side, I guess you could say. And generally the inverse applying, where if you're in a calorie surplus, you kind of don't need to have quite so much.
Boys.
Yeah, like Kenny was saying, I think the protein part of it especially can be really useful. And for people that aren't tracking their macros closely, I think that's probably the best piece of advice, is to at least keep an eye on how much protein you're getting in. Doesn't need to be super strict or anything, but at least getting a reasonable amount of protein, because a lot of times eating instinctively, most people are going to be very low on their protein, sometimes under 50 grams of protein per day. I know I've been there too when I'm not tracking. So I would say for people that don't want to track closely on their nutrition, at least make a point to get a reasonable amount of protein in.
Yeah, I think especially for newer athletes, that, and then making sure that you're in a caloric surplus for as much of the year as possible are going to be the two best things to serve you nutritionally.
Absolutely.
Sweet. So we've got a lot more to talk about. We're going to save it for the next episode. We're going to continue to bring on good guests. If you're listening and you have specific people you want us to bring on, please let us know. If you go to thestrengthathlete.com/podcast, there's a link to send us a message and let us know. And that's where we'll be posting this and all future episodes.
Yeah, you can find us on YouTube as well as Stitcher and iTunes now as well.
iTunes. And I like SoundCloud too. The
and
interface,
SoundCloud.
The play pause button and the little waveform. I like that.
Which brings us back around to one more thing I wanted to mention before we wrap up. Just another thanks for LVD Fitness, just for kind of making it possible for us to have all our episodes on the air. There is some interesting aspects to that, and we are grateful.
Absolutely. LVD Fitness, you can check them out online. They have some fantastic clothes, a great community up in Canada, and good people. So that's going to do it for this episode. I am Bryce Lewis. We have Joe Stanek, Eric Bodhorn, Chris Aydin, and Hani Jazayrli. You can find us on our website at thestrengthathlete.com. You can find us on the Instagram at our first names _TSA. Chris Aydin is Aydin, AYDIN _TSA. And we look forward to continuing to support the powerlifting community.
Hell yeah.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, guys. A year of gains to everyone.
Yeah.